Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. That whole Hinge experience, it messed me up. I'm not gonna lie. Before that, I was pretty naive, I guess. I thought people were generally good, or at least mostly harmless. Now I see the world through a different lens, and it all started with a damn dating app. I learned the hard way that online profiles can be meticulously crafted illusions, and some people are experts at wearing masks. That experience taught me to always be aware of the unsettling dissonance between someone's carefully curated online persona and the unsettling reality that might be lurking beneath. I'd been using Hinge for a few months, casually swiping, going on a few dates that were mostly forgettable. Then I matched with Ethan. His profile was refreshing, I guess is the word. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had kind eyes and a genuine smile. His prompts were thoughtful, revealing a sense of humor and a hint of vulnerability. He said he was a writer, loved hiking, and was looking for someone to explore the world with, one coffee shop at a time. It all seemed so normal. We started chatting, and the conversations flowed easily. He was articulate, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about our families, our dreams, our favorite books, even our fears. He was open and honest about his struggles with anxiety, which, oddly enough, made me feel more comfortable around him. It felt like we were building a real connection, not just exchanging superficial pleasantries. After a couple of weeks of messaging, we decided to meet for coffee. He suggested a small, independent cafe near my apartment. He was even more charming in person. He listened intently, laughed at my jokes, and made me feel like I was the only person in the room. The conversation was easy, the chemistry was undeniable, and I left that date feeling genuinely excited. We started seeing each other regularly. Hikes in the park, cozy movie nights at his apartment, dinners at quirky restaurants. He was always attentive, considerate, and surprisingly romantic. He wrote me poems, left me little notes, and always made sure I knew how much he appreciated me. I was falling for him, hard. He seemed too good to be true. That should have been my first clue. The first red flag was subtle, almost unnoticeable. He started asking about my schedule, my routines. At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed like normal getting to know you stuff. But then the questions became more specific. What time I left for work, when I came home, who I spent time with. He even asked about my security system, whether I had cameras, if my neighbors were nosy. I brushed it off as him being curious, maybe a little overprotective. But then things started getting stranger. He would show up at my apartment unexpectedly, claiming he was just in the neighborhood or wanted to surprise me. He started calling me multiple times a day, often late at night, just to hear my voice. He also became increasingly possessive. He didn't like it when I spent time with my friends, especially male friends. He would subtly guilt-trip me, making me feel like I was choosing them over him. He started isolating me from my support system, and I didn't even realize it was happening. The second red flag was his temper. He was usually so calm and collected, but every now and then, he would explode over something small. A spilled drink, a missed call, a wrong word. His eyes would darken, his jaw would clench, and he would unleash a torrent of anger that was both terrifying and confusing. He would always apologize afterward, showering me with affection and promises that it would never happen again. He blamed his outbursts on his anxiety, his childhood, his past relationships. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he was a good person deep down. The third red flag was the lies. Small lies at first, easily dismissed. A fib about where he was, a fabricated story about his past. But the lies grew bigger, more elaborate, more frequent. He lied about his job, his family, his friends. He created a whole alternate reality, and I was starting to realize that I didn't know him at all. One night, I decided to do some digging. I started with a simple Google search, and what I found chilled me to the bone. The name he had given me wasn't his real name. The job he claimed to have didn't exist. The stories he told me about his past were all fabricated. He was a complete and utter fabrication. I confronted him, of course. He denied everything at first, but when I presented him with the evidence, he finally broke down. He confessed to everything, tears streaming down his face. He said he was sorry, that he loved me, that he didn't want to hurt me. But I didn't believe him anymore. I knew that everything he said was a lie, a manipulation, a carefully constructed performance designed to control me. I told him to leave and never contact me again. He didn't take it well. He started stalking me. He would follow me to work, to the gym, to the grocery store. He would call me incessantly, leave me threatening messages, send me disturbing gifts. He knew everything about me, my routines, my fears, my weaknesses. I felt like I was living in a horror movie. I went to the police, but they couldn't do anything without concrete evidence. I installed security cameras, changed my locks, and carried pepper spray everywhere I went. I lived in constant fear, terrified of what he might do. One night, I came home to find my apartment ransacked. My furniture was overturned, my belongings were scattered everywhere, and there was a message scrawled on the wall in blood. If I can't have you, no one can. I called the police again, and this time, they took me seriously. They issued a restraining order and started investigating him more thoroughly. They discovered that he had a history of stalking and harassing women. He had even been arrested for assault in the past. It took months, but they finally caught him. He was charged with stalking, harassment, and violating the restraining order. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. I moved to a different city, changed my name, and started a new life. But the scars of that experience are still with me. I struggle to trust people, especially men. I'm constantly on edge, always scanning my surroundings, looking for signs of danger. That experience taught me to always be aware of the unsettling dissonance between someone's carefully curated online persona and the unsettling reality that might be lurking beneath. It taught me to trust my instincts, even when they seem irrational. It taught me that even the most charming and seemingly normal people can be capable of unspeakable things. More than anything, it taught me that I am stronger than I ever thought possible. I survived something that could have easily destroyed me. I am a survivor, and I will never let anyone control me again. I am also more aware of my surroundings. I check every corner, and I don't care how paranoid it makes me look. I am not letting anything happen to me again. I still think about him sometimes, and the darkness he brought into my life, but I refuse to let him define me. I am not a victim. I am a survivor, and I will continue to heal and grow, one day at a time. I refuse to let anyone else manipulate me again. I am smarter. I am aware. I will always keep my guard up. Okay, so I need to preface this by saying I'm a pretty level-headed person. I don't scare easily, and I tend to look for rational explanations before jumping to conclusions. But what happened to me after matching with someone on Hinge? I still can't fully explain it. And honestly, just thinking about it makes my skin crawl. I was using Hinge after a particularly brutal breakup. You know, the usual rebound thing, trying to convince myself I was ready to move on. I wasn't really looking for anything serious, just someone to grab a drink with and maybe take my mind off things. Then I matched with Liam. His profile was intriguing. Not your typical Hinge bro. He had these brooding, artistic photos, black and white shots of him in what looked like abandoned buildings, close-ups of his hands covered in paint, that kind of thing. His prompts were thoughtful, a little dark, but in a way that felt almost magnetic. He said he was a sculptor, worked mostly with metal, and that he found beauty in decay. I know, it sounds like a total cliché now, but at the time, I was hooked. We started chatting, and the conversations were intense right away. He wasn't into small talk. He wanted to talk about life, death, the meaning of existence. He asked me about my fears, my dreams, my deepest insecurities. It was way too much, way too fast, but I was drawn to it. It felt different from the mindless swiping and surface-level conversations I was used to. After a few days of this, he asked me out. He suggested meeting at a gallery opening in a part of town I didn't know very well. I hesitated. Something felt off, but I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just a date, right? The gallery was in this old, industrial building, the kind with exposed brick and high ceilings. The art was strange. Lots of abstract sculptures made from scrap metal, twisted and contorted into grotesque shapes. It fit Liam perfectly. When I met him, he was even more intense in person. Tall, pale, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. He was wearing all black, and he had this way of moving that was almost unsettling, like a predator sizing up its prey. We spent the evening wandering through the gallery, him explaining the art in this hushed, almost reverent tone. He talked about how metal held memories, how it absorbed the energy of the things it had witnessed. It was all a bit much, but I was still intrigued. Then he started talking about his own work. He said he was working on a new piece, something that would capture the essence of human emotion. He wouldn't tell me what it was, but he said it was his most ambitious project yet. As the night went on, Liam became more and more intense. He kept touching my arm, staring into my eyes, asking me questions about my past. He wanted to know about my relationships, my family, my childhood traumas. It felt like an interrogation, not a date. I started to feel really uncomfortable. I told him I had to go, that I wasn't feeling well. He didn't try to stop me, but he gave me this strange, knowing look that made my blood run cold. He said, "I understand, but you can't run from your true self." I practically ran out of the gallery and into a waiting Uber. I didn't breathe easy until I was back in my apartment. Doors locked, curtains drawn. I blocked Liam on Hinge and tried to forget the whole thing. But that's when the weirdness really started. A few days later, I started getting messages from an unknown number. Just a single word each time. Watched. Seen. Known. I blocked the number, but the messages kept coming from different numbers. It was like he was toying with me. Then I started noticing things in my apartment. Small things, like a book moved from one shelf to another, or a picture frame slightly askew. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just paranoid, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger every day. One night, I woke up to a noise in my living room. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and crept out of my bedroom. The TV was on, playing static, and on the screen, scrawled in what looked like blood, was a single word: Liam. I screamed and ran back to my bedroom, slamming the door and locking it. I called the police, but when they arrived, the TV was off, and there was no sign of anything amiss. They said I was probably just stressed and suggested I get some rest. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the entire night huddled in my bed, clutching the knife, listening to every creak and groan of the building. The next day, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when Liam was going to strike again. I did some digging online and found his address, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. I know it was a stupid idea, but I felt like I had no choice. I had to confront him, to make him stop. I drove out to the warehouse that afternoon. It was even more creepy and isolated than I had imagined. The building was dark and dilapidated, with boarded-up windows and graffiti-covered walls. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of metal. The warehouse was filled with sculptures, the same twisted, grotesque creations I had seen at the gallery. Then I saw him. Liam was standing in the center of the warehouse, working on something. He was shirtless, his body covered in sweat and metal shavings. He didn't seem to notice me. I walked closer, and that's when I saw what he was working on. It was a sculpture, a life-sized figure of a woman, contorted into a position of terror. And the face was mine. I gasped, and Liam turned around. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that made my skin crawl. "I've been waiting for you," he said. "I knew you'd come." He started walking towards me, and I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't," he said. "You're part of my art now. You're part of me." He lunged at me, and I screamed. I don't know what happened next. Everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, my head throbbing. The police were there, asking me questions. They said they found me unconscious in the warehouse, next to Liam's body. He was dead. They said he had been working on the sculpture for months, that he had become obsessed with me after our date. They found evidence of stalking, harassment, and even kidnapping. They said he was a dangerous man, a psychopath. They never found out exactly what happened in the warehouse. All I know is that I'm alive, and he's not. But I'll never forget the terror of that night, the feeling of being hunted, the realization that someone I met on Hinge could be capable of such evil. I haven't touched a dating app since. The thought of it still makes me sick. If I hadn't trusted my instincts that day, I wouldn't be sitting here, staring at the flickering candlelight, trying to piece together the fragments of a night that shattered my perception of reality. It all started, innocently enough, on Hinge. You know, the dating app designed to be deleted. Irony at its finest, I suppose. I had been using it for a few months, wading through the predictable profiles, the gym selfies, the travel pics, the bios that read like a corporate mission statement. Nothing really clicked, nothing felt genuine. Then I stumbled upon Liam's profile. His pictures were different, not professionally shot, but candid, real. One of him hiking in what looked like the Adirondacks, another of him laughing with friends around a campfire. His bio was simple, almost disarmingly honest, looking for someone who enjoys deep conversations and spontaneous adventures. Bonus points if you can tolerate my questionable taste in music. I liked his profile, sent a comment about his questionable taste in music, jokingly accusing him of being a Nickelback fan, and waited. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. Our conversations were easy, flowing effortlessly from lighthearted banter to surprisingly profound discussions. We talked about our families, our dreams, our fears. He seemed intelligent, witty, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet up. He proposed a coffee shop in a nearby town, a place I had never been to before, but that he described as cozy and quirky. I hesitated, a flicker of unease nagging at the back of my mind. I didn't know why, but something about his eagerness felt a little off. I chalked it up to nerves, the usual pre-date jitters. I pushed the feeling aside and agreed. Big mistake. The day of the date, I felt a strange sense of anticipation mixed with dread. I got ready slowly, carefully choosing my outfit, trying to project an air of confidence I didn't quite feel. As I drove to the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced in my rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. Just the empty highway, stretching out behind me. The coffee shop was exactly as Liam had described, cozy and quirky, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in local art. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table near the window. He stood up as I approached, a warm smile on his face. He was taller than I expected, with piercing blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that fell across his forehead. He was undeniably handsome. The first hour of the date went smoothly. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, our favorite books. He was charming and attentive, and I found myself relaxing, letting my guard down. But then the conversation took a turn. He started asking me personal questions, probing questions about my past, my relationships, my deepest insecurities. The questions weren't inherently inappropriate, but the intensity with which he asked them made me uncomfortable. He seemed to be trying to dissect me, to understand me on a level that felt invasive. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he kept circling back to the same themes. He asked about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, and the reasons why my past relationships had ended. It was like he was trying to find a vulnerability, a weakness he could exploit. And his eyes, his piercing blue eyes, never left mine. They seemed to see right through me, to strip away my defenses and expose my raw emotions. The unease I had felt earlier returned, stronger than ever. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, to get away from this man as quickly as possible. But I ignored them. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting. I didn't want to be rude, to make a scene. So I stayed. Another mistake. As the date progressed, Liam's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started fidgeting, tapping his fingers on the table, and glancing nervously around the coffee shop. He seemed agitated, on edge. He kept repeating my name. I remember I mentioned that I would need to leave early. He repeated the name back to me, over and over, until I told him to stop. His questions turned darker, more disturbing. He asked if I believed in fate, in destiny. He asked if I thought everything happened for a reason. He told me that he had been waiting for me, that he knew we were meant to be together. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic, but his words sent shivers down my spine. He asked me if I was scared, and I was. I was terrified. I knew then that something was terribly wrong. I stood up abruptly, knocking over my chair. "I have to go," I said, my voice trembling. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Where are you going?" he asked, his eyes burning into mine. "Let go of me," I said, trying to pull away. He didn't release his grip. "We're not finished talking," he said, his voice low and menacing. I panicked. I looked around the coffee shop, hoping someone would notice my distress, but everyone seemed oblivious, lost in their own worlds. I kicked him in the shin, hard. He yelped in pain and released my arm. I turned and ran, pushing my way through the crowded coffee shop. ignoring the confused stares and muttered curses. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. I started the engine and sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I drove straight to the police station and reported what had happened. I told them everything, from the strange questions to his disturbing behavior. They took my statement, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. They said Liam hadn't broken any laws, that he was just being overly enthusiastic. They advised me to block him on Hinge and to avoid contact with him. That was it. As if blocking him on an app would magically erase the terror I had felt. As if avoiding contact would guarantee my safety. In the days that followed, I was constantly on edge. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I kept reliving the date in my mind, wondering what I had missed, what I could have done differently. I was paranoid, convinced that Liam was watching me, that he knew where I lived. I started seeing him everywhere, in the grocery store, at the gas station, even in my own neighborhood. I knew it was probably just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was closing in on me. One evening, I came home from work and found my apartment door ajar. I froze, my blood running cold. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was silent, eerily still. I cautiously made my way through the living room, my hand trembling as I reached for the light switch. I flipped the switch, and the room was flooded with light. And that's when I saw it. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like blood, were the words, "You can't hide from fate." I screamed. I ran out of the apartment and didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's door. I pounded on the door, hysterically telling her what had happened. She called the police, and they arrived within minutes. They searched my apartment, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of Liam's presence. They said the message on the wall could have been written by anyone, that it was impossible to prove Liam was involved. I was terrified. I knew that I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I packed my bags and moved out the next day. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my family. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and went into hiding. I started a new life in a new city, trying to forget the nightmare I had experienced. But the memory of Liam's piercing blue eyes and his chilling words haunted me. I knew that he was still out there, somewhere, and I knew that he wouldn't stop until he found me. So here I am, years later, still looking over my shoulder, still haunted by the what-ifs. What if I had trusted my instincts that day? What if I had listened to the warning bells ringing in my head? What if I had never swiped right on Liam's profile? I'll never know. But one thing I do know is that I'll never trust a dating app again. And I'll never ignore my instincts, no matter how irrational they may seem. Because sometimes, your instincts are the only thing that stands between you and a nightmare you can't escape. Now, the candlelight is almost out, and I am alone. The darkness may be coming. I will remember the warning signs and try to remember that I can survive. So picture this, me, fresh out of a terrible breakup, convinced that the only way to move on was to dive headfirst into the chaotic world of dating apps. Everyone was raving about Hinge, how it was for relationships, not just hookups. I wanted a relationship. I wanted to feel something other than the dull ache of heartbreak. I wish someone would have warned me. It all started so innocently. I created my profile, carefully selecting pictures that showcased my best angles. We all have them, right? I crafted witty answers to the prompts, trying to strike the perfect balance between funny and thoughtful. I even put in that I enjoyed long walks on the beach, fully knowing I'd rather be curled up with a good book. But hey, gotta play the game, right? The matches started rolling in. At first, it was exciting. So many potential suitors, all seemingly interested in getting to know me beyond a surface level. I swiped and chatted, feeling a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find someone who actually understood me. And then I met Liam. Liam's profile was intriguing. He had this brooding, artistic vibe. His pictures were all black and white, and his prompts answers were surprisingly poetic. He claimed to be a writer, which, as someone who secretly harbored aspirations of becoming a novelist, immediately piqued my interest. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He asked me about my dreams, my fears, my favorite books. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know the real me, not just the dating app version. We talked for hours, late into the night, and I found myself actually looking forward to his messages. He was different from anyone I had ever dated before. More thoughtful, more introspective. After a week of intense texting, he asked me out. I said yes without hesitation. Our first date was at a cozy little coffee shop. Liam was even more captivating in person. He had this intense gaze that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, and I felt a connection that I hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Liam and I became inseparable. We went on hikes, saw movies, cooked dinner together. He even read my terrible first attempt at a novel and offered constructive criticism that didn't make me want to burst into tears. I was falling hard and fast. He was everything I thought I wanted: intelligent, sensitive, and passionate. But then, the cracks started to appear. Small things at first. He'd get inexplicably angry over minor inconveniences, like a delayed train or a spilled coffee. He'd make snide remarks about other people, judging them harshly for their flaws. I chalked it up to him being passionate and tried to brush it off. But the cracks kept widening. He started becoming possessive. He'd constantly ask where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing. He'd get jealous if I spent time with my friends without him. He'd scroll through my social media, analyzing every like and comment. I told him he was being unreasonable, that I needed space, but he just accused me of not caring about him enough. He started gaslighting me. He'd deny things he said or did, making me question my own memory and sanity. He'd twist my words, turning me into the villain in every situation. He'd make me feel like I was crazy for even questioning his behavior. I tried to talk to him about it, to explain how his actions were affecting me, but he wouldn't listen. He'd just get defensive, accusing me of being dramatic and oversensitive. He made me feel like I was the problem, like I was the one who needed to change. The once charming and thoughtful Liam was now a controlling and manipulative monster. I was trapped in a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. I knew I needed to get out, but I was scared. He had isolated me from my friends and family, making me feel like he was the only person I could rely on. He had eroded my self-esteem, making me believe that I was worthless and unlovable. One night, after a particularly nasty argument, Liam stormed out of my apartment. I was left alone, sobbing uncontrollably, feeling utterly broken and defeated. I looked around my apartment, at all the things that reminded me of him, and I realized that I couldn't live like this anymore. I had to escape. The next morning, I packed a bag, wrote Liam a note telling him it was over, and left. I went to stay with my best friend, Sarah, who had been warning me about Liam for months. She welcomed me with open arms, no judgment, just pure, unconditional love. Leaving Liam was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best thing I've ever done. It was a long and painful process, but with Sarah's support, I started to heal. I went to therapy, where I learned about manipulative behavior and gaslighting. I reconnected with my friends and family, who reminded me of my worth and strength. I started doing things that made me happy again, like reading, writing, and spending time in nature. I slowly began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. Looking back, I can see all the red flags that I ignored in the beginning. His intense gaze, his poetic pronouncements, his quick temper. They were all warning signs that I chose to overlook because I was so desperate to find love. Hinge, I realized, wasn't a magical portal to finding the one. It was just another dating app, filled with people who were just as flawed and complicated as anyone else. Some were genuine and kind, others were manipulative and dangerous. I wish someone had warned me about the dark side of Hinge, about the possibility of meeting someone who seemed perfect, but was actually a master manipulator. I wish someone had told me to trust my instincts, even when they contradicted my desires. I wish someone had reminded me that I was worthy of love and respect, and that I didn't have to settle for anything less. I'm still wary of dating apps, and I'm definitely taking things slow in my current relationship. But I've learned a valuable lesson, that true love starts with self-love, and that I am the only one who can protect myself from the Liams of the world. Don't ignore the small signs. Listen to your gut, not your heart. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but looking back, the Hinge prompt was a little off. It was one of those icebreaker questions. What's a hill you're willing to die on? Most people put something funny or trivial, like pineapple doesn't belong on pizza, or the Oxford comma is essential. Sarah's, however, was protecting those who can't protect themselves. It wasn't alarming, not exactly. It even seemed admirable. But there was a seriousness to it, a conviction that felt heavier than the other answers I'd seen. I'd been on Hinge for a few months, cycling through the same faces, the same predictable conversations. I was starting to think that maybe online dating just wasn't for me. But then I saw Sarah's profile. Her pictures were genuine, not overly posed or filtered. She had a kind smile and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she laughed in one of her photos. Her bio mentioned a love for hiking and a passion for animal rescue. She seemed normal, refreshingly so. We matched, and our conversation flowed easily. She was intelligent, witty, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about our jobs, our families, our hobbies. We bonded over our shared love of books and our mutual disdain for reality television. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet for coffee. The date went well. Sarah was even more charming in person. She had a calming presence, a way of making you feel like you could tell her anything. We talked for hours, and I found myself drawn to her. She was passionate about her volunteer work at a local animal shelter, and she spoke with such empathy and compassion about the animals in her care. It was clear that protecting those who can't protect themselves wasn't just a line on her Hinge profile. It was a core part of who she was. We went on a few more dates over the next few weeks. We hiked in the mountains, explored local art galleries, and cooked dinner at my apartment. I was starting to fall for her. She was different from anyone I had ever dated before. She was genuine, caring, and fiercely independent. But there were also things I didn't understand. She was secretive about certain aspects of her life. She never talked about her past relationships, and she was vague about her family. She always brushed it off, saying she preferred to live in the present. But there was a guardedness in her eyes that made me wonder what she was hiding. One evening, we were driving back from a movie, and I noticed a strange car following us. It was a black sedan with tinted windows, and it had been behind us for several miles. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but Sarah seemed unnerved. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just a little tired," she said, her voice tight. The car continued to follow us, and I started to feel uneasy. I took a few turns, trying to lose it, but it stayed right behind us. Finally, I pulled over to the side of the road. The black sedan stopped a short distance behind us. "What's going on, Sarah?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something about my work." She explained that she worked for a small, underground organization that rescued animals from abusive situations. They targeted puppy mills, research labs, and illegal breeding operations. It was dangerous work, she said, and they often faced opposition from powerful and unscrupulous people. "That car," she said. "I think they're watching me." I was stunned. I had no idea that Sarah was involved in something like this. It was exciting and a little scary. I admired her dedication, but I also worried about her safety. "Are you in danger?" I asked. "Maybe," she said, "but I can't stop. These animals need me." I wanted to tell her to quit, to find a safer way to help. But I knew that wouldn't work. This was who she was. Over the next few weeks, I became more involved in Sarah's work. I helped her research targets, gather evidence, and plan rescues. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time. I saw firsthand the cruelty and indifference that these animals faced, and I understood why Sarah was so passionate about her mission. One night, Sarah received a tip about a puppy mill operating in a remote rural area. It was a large-scale operation, with hundreds of dogs living in deplorable conditions. Sarah was determined to shut it down. We spent days planning the rescue. We gathered a team of volunteers, secured transportation, and coordinated with local law enforcement. It was a risky operation, but we were confident that we could pull it off. The night of the rescue, we drove out to the puppy mill. It was a desolate place, surrounded by barbed wire fences and guarded by armed men. We waited until nightfall, then slipped through a hole in the fence. The conditions inside the puppy mill were even worse than we had imagined. Dogs were crammed into small, filthy cages with no food or water. Many were sick or injured, and some were already dead. The stench was overwhelming. We worked quickly, freeing the dogs from their cages and loading them into our vehicles. But as we were about to leave, we were ambushed. The guards had discovered us, and they opened fire. Chaos erupted. Gunshots rang out, and dogs barked in terror. We scrambled for cover, trying to protect ourselves and the animals. Sarah was in the middle of it all, fearlessly leading the charge. I saw one of the guards aiming a gun at Sarah. Without thinking, I jumped in front of her, taking the bullet myself. Everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body aching. Sarah was sitting beside me, her eyes red and swollen. "You saved my life," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You would have done the same for me," I said. The puppy mill was shut down, and the dogs were rescued. But the experience changed me. I had seen the darkness in the world, but I had also seen the light. I had found a purpose, a reason to fight for what was right. Sarah and I continued to work together, rescuing animals and fighting for justice. We faced many challenges, but we never gave up. We knew that we were making a difference, one animal at a time. The protecting those who can't protect themselves. Hill wasn't just a quirky Hinge prompt. It was a guiding principle, a call to action. And it led me to something real, something meaningful, something worth fighting for, even if it meant taking a bullet. It led me to Sarah. I never would have thought swiping right on Hinge could lead me to this. But sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most important destinations. Now I understand those red flags weren't red. They were a signal for me. My calling. And a lifelong adventure with a woman who is willing to risk everything. Hinge worked. So I'm not usually one to believe in the supernatural or anything like that. I'm a pretty logical person. I work in accounting, for God's sake. Numbers are numbers, facts are facts. That's always been my motto. But what happened after I met Mark through Hinge? Well, it's made me seriously question everything I thought I knew about the world. I'd been on Hinge for a while, you know, the usual dating app grind. Lots of awkward first dates. Guys who looked nothing like their pictures. The occasional decent conversation that fizzled out after a week. It was all pretty standard. Then I came across Mark's profile. He was cute, had a witty bio about loving obscure documentaries, and his pictures seemed genuine, not overly posed or filtered. We matched, and our conversation flowed easily from the start. We talked about our favorite movies, our families, our dream travel destinations. He was intelligent, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet up for coffee. He suggested this cozy little cafe in my neighborhood that I'd never been to before. It was tucked away on a quiet street, with string lights and comfy armchairs. Mark was even more charming in person. He had this warm smile and these kind eyes that made me feel instantly comfortable. We talked for hours, and the conversation never lagged. It felt like we'd known each other for years. We started seeing each other regularly after that. We went to movies, tried new restaurants, took walks in the park. Everything felt easy and natural. He was considerate, attentive, and always made me feel special. I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found someone who was genuinely good for me. But then, things started to get weird. It started with little things. Things I initially brushed off as coincidences or just me being forgetful. Like, I'd mention a book I wanted to read, and the next day, he'd have already bought it for me. Or I'd casually mention a band I liked, and he'd somehow score tickets to their sold-out concert. At first, I was just impressed by his thoughtfulness and attentiveness. But then it started happening more and more frequently, and it felt unsettling. One night, we were at my apartment watching a movie. I had a blanket that my grandmother had knitted for me before she passed away. It was really special to me. I mentioned to Mark that I needed to get it repaired because one of the corners was starting to unravel. The next day, I came home from work, and the blanket was perfectly repaired. I asked him if he had taken it to a tailor or something, and he just smiled and said, "I took care of it." He wouldn't elaborate. That's when the first seed of doubt started to creep into my mind. How could he have known about the blanket? How could he have gotten it repaired so quickly? It just didn't make sense. I started paying closer attention to the things I said to him, trying to see if there was a pattern. And that's when I noticed something even stranger. He seemed to know things about me that I hadn't even told him. One day, we were talking about our childhoods, and he mentioned a specific incident that had happened to me when I was 10 years old. It was something that I had completely forgotten about, something I had never told anyone, not even my closest friends. When I asked him how he knew about it, he just shrugged and said, "I don't know. It just came to me." That's when I started to get genuinely scared. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had mentioned it to him at some point, and just didn't remember. Maybe he had somehow found it online, although I couldn't imagine where it would be. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that none of it made sense. There was no logical explanation for how he could have known these things. I started to avoid him, making excuses to cancel our dates. I told him I was busy with work, or that I wasn't feeling well. I needed time to figure out what was going on. He started calling me more frequently, texting me constantly. He seemed desperate to see me, and his messages started to become more intense. He would say things like, "I miss you so much. I can't stand being away from you." Or, "I need you in my life. You're everything to me." It was suffocating. One night, I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept hearing strange noises outside my window, like someone was pacing back and forth. I peeked through the blinds, but I didn't see anything. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that I was being paranoid, but the feeling persisted. I couldn't shake the sense that Mark was somehow watching me, that he knew everything I was doing. I decided to do some research. I started Googling his name, trying to find out more about him, but there was almost nothing online. No social media profiles, no job listings, no public records. It was like he didn't exist. That's when I started to think I was going crazy. Was I imagining all of this? Was I just projecting my own fears and insecurities onto him? But then I found something. Buried deep in a forum about local history, I found a thread about a series of disappearances that had occurred in my town several decades ago. Young women, all around my age, had vanished without a trace. The thread mentioned a local legend about a man who had the ability to read minds and predict the future. He was said to be charming and charismatic, but also deeply disturbed. The legend said that he would lure women into relationships with him, then eventually make them disappear. I dismissed it as just a creepy story. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Someone had posted an old photograph of a man who was rumored to be connected to the disappearances. The photo was grainy and faded, but there was no doubt in my mind. It was Mark. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was going to pass out. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. Could it be possible? Could Mark really be the man from the legend? I knew I had to get away. I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. I packed a bag with some clothes and essentials, and I called a friend who lived in another state. I told her what was happening, and she offered to let me stay with her for a while. I left my apartment in the middle of the night, trying to be as quiet as possible. I didn't want Mark to know that I was leaving. As I was pulling out of my parking space, I saw him. He was standing across the street, in the shadows, watching me. He didn't say anything, didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on me. I slammed on the gas and sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I stayed with my friend for several months. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and tried to erase myself from the internet. I was terrified that Mark would find me. Eventually, I moved back to my town, but I never went back to my old apartment. I found a new place in a different neighborhood, and I tried to rebuild my life. I still think about Mark sometimes. I wonder where he is, what he's doing. I wonder if he's still out there, preying on unsuspecting women. I know that some people might think I'm crazy. They might say that I'm just paranoid, that I imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And I know that Mark was not who he seemed to be. He was something else. Something dangerous. To this day, I refuse to use Hinge, or any dating app for that matter. The thought of going through that again is enough to send shivers down my spine. I'm happy being single, if it means staying safe. I'd rather be alone than end up like those women from a legend, because I thought I was being paranoid, until I found out I was running from something much, much worse, something not of this world. The moment I knew something was wrong was when the dove started. Not real doves, obviously. Doves don't just materialize in Brooklyn apartments, no matter how quirky the building is. These were digital doves, little white icons that would inexplicably appear on Amelia's Hinge profile whenever I looked at it. It started subtly, just a single dove perched innocently on her shoulder in one of her photos. I figured it was some weird glitch, maybe a new feature I didn't understand. But then there were more. A flock of them fluttering around her head in another picture. A whole covey of doves roosting on her About Me section. It was absurd, unsettling, and, if I'm being honest, initially intriguing. I'd met Amelia on Hinge, Like everyone else in the city, looking for something beyond a fleeting connection. Her profile was refreshingly authentic. No heavily filtered selfies, no cliché travel photos, just genuine smiles and snippets of her life as a ceramic artist. We matched instantly, and our conversations flowed effortlessly, bouncing from shared interests in obscure indie films to our mutual disdain for brunch culture. After a week of online banter, we decided to meet up at a cozy wine bar in the West Village. The date was perfect. Amelia was even more captivating in person. She had this infectious energy that made you feel like you were the only two people in the room. We talked for hours, lost in each other's stories, laughing until our sides ached. By the end of the night, I was completely smitten. We made plans to see each other again, and as I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd finally found someone special. But then the doves started appearing on her profile. At first, I brushed it off as a strange technical issue. I even joked about it to my friends, framing it as a funny anecdote about the weirdness of online dating. Maybe she's secretly a bird whisperer, I'd say, trying to make light of the situation. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The doves weren't the only thing that started to feel strange. Amelia's behavior began to shift subtly. She became more distant, her texts less frequent, her responses shorter. When I tried to make plans, she was always busy, or out of town, or dealing with a family emergency. The excuses piled up, each one more vague and unconvincing than the last. I tried to talk to her about it, to ask if everything was okay, but she would always deflect, changing the subject or cutting the conversation short. "I'm just stressed," she'd say, her eyes darting away. "Don't worry about it." But I did worry. I couldn't help but worry. Something was clearly wrong, and she wasn't letting me in. And then there were the inconsistencies. Small details in her stories that didn't quite add up. Places she claimed to have been that she couldn't describe properly. Friends she mentioned but never introduced me to. It was like she was living a double life, and I was only seeing a carefully curated version of the truth. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Was I imagining things? Was I being paranoid? I confided in my best friend, Sarah, who listened patiently to my rambling concerns. "Maybe you're just overthinking it," she said. "Give her the benefit of the doubt. People get busy. Things happen." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play. I decided to do some digging. I know it sounds crazy, but I started Googling Amelia, searching for any information that might shed light on her past. What I found was unsettling, to say the least. There were old social media profiles, abandoned and filled with cryptic posts. A blog she'd started and then abruptly stopped writing, filled with dark, introspective musings. And then there was the news article, a brief report about a missing person case from a few years ago, a young woman who had disappeared without a trace. The woman's name was Emily Carter, and she looked strikingly similar to Amelia. My blood ran cold. Could it be possible? Could Amelia be someone else entirely? I spent hours poring over the article, comparing the details to what I knew about Amelia. The similarities were undeniable. Both women were artists. Both had lived in the same city. Both had a penchant for vintage clothing. I knew I had to confront her. I couldn't keep living with this uncertainty, this gnawing feeling that I was being deceived. I texted her, asking if we could meet up. She hesitated, but eventually agreed to see me the next day at a coffee shop near her apartment. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I felt like I was about to step into a nightmare. I rehearsed what I was going to say, trying to stay calm and rational, but inside I was a mess of anxiety and fear. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Amelia was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked pale and drawn, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. As I sat down, I noticed something new on her Hinge profile, which was open on her phone, face up on the table. The doves were everywhere, hundreds of them, swarming around her photos like a biblical plague. "Amelia," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "I know," she said softly. "I know what you're going to ask." I took a deep breath and plunged in. "Who are you really?" I asked. "Are you Emily Carter?" Her face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but her silence was confirmation enough. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What's going on?" She hesitated for a moment, then began to speak, her voice low and trembling. She told me a story that was so bizarre, so unbelievable, that I almost didn't believe it myself. She explained that she was indeed Emily Carter, but that she had undergone a radical form of therapy after experiencing a traumatic event. The therapy had altered her memories, her personality, her entire sense of self. She had become someone else, someone she didn't even recognize. The doves, she explained, were a side effect of the therapy, a visual manifestation of the changes in her brain. They appeared on her Hinge profile whenever she was experiencing a shift in her identity, a moment of uncertainty about who she really was. As she spoke, I noticed that the doves on her phone were multiplying, swarming around her photos like a swarm of locusts. I felt a chill run down my spine. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm lost. I don't know who I am anymore." I reached across the table and took her hand. "It's okay," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll figure it out. Together." But even as I said the words, I knew that things would never be the same. The woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone broken and lost, haunted by the ghosts of her past. We left the coffee shop and walked in silence to her apartment. As we stood in front of her building, I knew that this was the end. I couldn't stay with her, not after everything I had learned. It was too much, too complicated, too dangerous. "Goodbye, Amelia," I said, my voice choked with emotion. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Goodbye," she said softly. "Thank you for everything." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there alone, surrounded by the digital doves that had become a symbol of her fractured identity. As I walked home, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right decision. Had I abandoned someone in need? Or had I escaped a dangerous situation? I'll never know the answer for sure. But I do know that the moment I saw those doves on her Hinge profile, I knew that something was terribly wrong, and that sometimes the most unsettling things are the ones that hide in plain sight, disguised as harmless glitches in the digital world. I wish someone had warned me about the Hinge algorithm, or maybe I wish I'd understood it better before diving headfirst into the murky waters of online dating. It wasn't just about the algorithm, though. It was about the curated reality, the carefully constructed profiles, and the way the app played on my vulnerabilities, turning my search for connection into a confusing, often disheartening game. It all started innocently enough. I was recently single, a bit lonely, and all my friends were either married, engaged, or deep in serious relationships. I felt like I was missing out, and the constant "you should try Hinge" from my coupled-up buddies eventually wore me down. Hinge, they said, was the relationship app. It was for people who were actually looking for something real, not just a hookup or a fleeting distraction. Naive me, I bought into it. I spent hours crafting my profile, agonizing over the perfect pictures and witty prompts. I wanted to present the best version of myself, authentic but also appealing. I carefully selected photos that showcased my interests, hiking, reading, traveling, and wrote prompts that highlighted my personality, my sense of humor, my passion for animal rescue, my general quirkiness. I thought I was doing everything right. At first, it was exciting. I was getting matches, engaging in conversations, and even going on a few dates. Some were okay, some were terrible, and a few were surprisingly good. I started to feel optimistic, like maybe, just maybe, this whole online dating thing could actually work. Then, things started to shift. I noticed that the people Hinge was showing me seemed to be getting less compatible. I was seeing profiles of guys who were clearly looking for something casual, who listed interests I couldn't relate to, or whose values seemed completely different from mine. I adjusted my preferences, tightened my filters, but nothing seemed to help. The algorithm kept throwing me curveballs. And then there was the most compatible feature. Hinge touted this as a way to connect you with people the algorithm deemed to be your ideal match. But the most compatible people I was seeing were often questionable. One guy listed his main interest as partying, and his biggest dating deal breaker as anyone who's too serious. Another was obsessed with cryptocurrency and conspiracy theories. It felt like Hinge was actively trying to sabotage my search. I started to suspect that the algorithm wasn't actually trying to find me a compatible partner. Instead, it seemed to be prioritizing engagement, showing me profiles that would provoke a reaction, whether positive or negative, just to keep me swiping. It was like the app was saying, "Here, Look at this awful person. You'll hate them, but you'll keep using the app. The more I used Hinge, the more cynical I became. I started to see through the carefully constructed profiles, the staged photos, and the empty promises. Everyone was trying so hard to present themselves as perfect, as desirable, as worthy of a match. It felt exhausting and inauthentic. I also noticed that Hinge was playing on my insecurities. The app constantly reminded me of how many likes I had, how many matches I was missing out on, how many potential connections were waiting just around the corner. It was like a constant stream of FOMO, designed to keep me hooked, to keep me swiping, to keep me paying for premium features. One particularly low point came when I matched with a guy who seemed genuinely great. We had a lot in common. Our conversations were engaging, and we even had a few mutual friends. We talked for weeks before finally agreeing to meet. I was nervous, but also excited. I genuinely thought this could be something special. The date was a disaster. He was nothing like the person he had portrayed himself to be online. He was arrogant, condescending, and completely uninterested in anything I had to say. It was like he had created a fake persona just to lure me in. I left the date feeling angry, betrayed, and utterly disillusioned with the whole process. That's when I decided to take a break from Hinge. I deleted the app from my phone and vowed to focus on other things, my friends, my family, my hobbies. I needed to disconnect from the curated reality of online dating and reconnect with the real world. But even after deleting the app, the experience lingered. I found myself questioning my own judgment, wondering if I was somehow responsible for attracting these kinds of people into my life. I started to doubt my ability to find a genuine connection, to believe that true love was even possible. It took me a long time to recover from the Hinge experience. I had to work on rebuilding my self-esteem, on trusting my instincts, and on remembering that I was worthy of love and connection, regardless of what an algorithm might say. Looking back, I realized that the problem wasn't just Hinge itself. It was also my own expectations, my own vulnerabilities, and my own willingness to buy into the illusion of online dating. I wanted to believe that finding love could be as easy as swiping right, that an algorithm could magically connect me with my soulmate. But true connection is messy, complicated, and often unpredictable. It requires vulnerability, authenticity, and a willingness to take risks. It can't be reduced to a series of carefully curated profiles and witty prompts. I eventually did return to online dating, but this time, I approached it with a different mindset. I was more selective about who I matched with, more skeptical of profiles that seemed too good to be true, and more willing to trust my gut instincts. I also stopped relying so heavily on the algorithm and started focusing on meeting people in real life, through friends, hobbies, and shared interests. And you know what? It worked. I eventually met someone who I was actually very compatible with. We connected on a deeper level. Our relationship is far from perfect, but it's real, authentic, and full of love and laughter. If I could go back and warn myself before downloading Hinge, I would say this: be wary of the algorithm. It's not your friend. It's designed to keep you engaged, not to find you love. Don't believe everything you see online. People are often presenting a curated version of themselves, not the whole truth. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let the app play on your insecurities. You are worthy of love, regardless of your match rate. And most importantly, remember that true connection happens in the real world, not on a screen. Go out, meet people, be yourself, and don't be afraid to take risks. You never know where you might find love. The dating apps never show you what you want to see, and it shows the world the worst of people. It is a good thing, but it is also something you should never fully get into. The dating apps are never the answer, but the people who are. I used to think these dating app horror stories were made up, exaggerated tales for clicks and likes, until it happened to me. And let me tell you, the reality is far more unsettling than any sensationalized article I'd ever read. It all started, innocently enough, on Hinge. You know, the app that's designed to be deleted. The one that promises meaningful connections instead of just mindless swiping. I was 28, recently out of a long-term relationship, and cautiously optimistic about dipping my toes back into the dating pool. My profile was pretty standard, a few decent photos, a witty bio, and answers to the prompts that showed off my supposed personality. I wasn't looking for anything too serious, but I was hoping to find someone with whom I could have interesting conversations and maybe share some adventures. Then I came across his profile. Liam. He was attractive, in a brooding, intellectual kind of way. His photos were artsy and thoughtful. One of him reading in a sun-drenched bookstore, another of him hiking in the mountains, a black and white portrait that made him look like he belonged in a film noir. His prompts were even more intriguing. He wrote about his love for classic literature, his passion for social justice, and his fascination with obscure historical events. He seemed perfect. Too perfect, maybe. But I ignored the nagging feeling of doubt and sent him a message. Our initial conversations were electric. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. We shared our favorite books, debated philosophical concepts, and laughed at each other's silly jokes. He was intelligent, articulate, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. It felt like I had finally found someone who truly got me. After a week of intense messaging, we decided to meet in person. He suggested a small, independent coffee shop in my neighborhood, the kind of place that played vinyl records and served organic pastries. I was nervous but excited. I spent hours agonizing over what to wear, wanting to make a good impression, but also wanting to be myself. When I finally arrived at the coffee shop, Liam was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He looked even more handsome in person. He greeted me with a warm smile and a hug that lingered just a little too long. The first hour of our date was amazing. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and we seemed to have even more in common in person than we did online. He told me about his work as a freelance writer, his travels through Europe, and his volunteer work with a local homeless shelter. He was charming, engaging, and seemingly genuine. But then, things started to get weird. He began asking me increasingly personal questions about my family, my past relationships, my deepest fears and insecurities. At first, I chalked it up to him being genuinely interested in getting to know me better. But the questions became more intense, more probing, more unsettling. He asked me about my childhood traumas, my financial situation, my relationship with my parents. It felt like he was trying to dissect me, to get under my skin and expose my vulnerabilities. I started to feel uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude. I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, but he kept bringing it back to the same topics. He seemed fixated on my past, on my pain. As the date went on, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He started fidgeting, pacing, and muttering to himself. He would suddenly stop talking mid-sentence, staring off into space with a glazed look in his eyes. He would laugh inappropriately at things that weren't funny, and he would make strange, cryptic comments that made no sense. At one point, he leaned in close to me, his eyes wide and intense, and whispered, "I know your secrets." I was terrified. I wanted to leave, but I was afraid of what he might do if I tried to escape. I made an excuse about having to get up early for work the next day and managed to end the date. He walked me to my car, his eyes following me with an unnerving intensity. He didn't say goodbye, just stood there on the sidewalk, watching me drive away. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the date in my head, trying to make sense of what had happened. I Googled his name, hoping to find some answers. What I found was horrifying. Liam wasn't a freelance writer. He was a convicted stalker with a history of harassing and threatening women he met online. He had been arrested several times for violating restraining orders and had spent time in a mental institution. The photos on his Hinge profile were years old, stolen from a social media account. I was sick to my stomach. I had been so close to becoming his next victim. I immediately blocked him on Hinge and reported his profile to the app. I contacted the police and filed a report. They took my case seriously and launched an investigation. I spent the next few weeks living in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was watching me. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and installed a security system in my apartment. I was a nervous wreck. The police eventually located Liam and took him into custody. He had been tracking me, following me to and from work, monitoring my online activity. He had even managed to find out where I lived. I shudder to think what might have happened if the police hadn't intervened. The experience changed me. I became more cautious, more guarded, more suspicious of people I met online. I deleted all my dating apps and vowed never to use them again. I realized that the internet wasn't always a safe place, and that people weren't always who they seemed to be. It's been a few years since the incident, but I still have nightmares. The memory of Liam's eyes, his unsettling questions, and the chilling realization that I had almost become another statistic haunts me. Now, when I hear about dating app horror stories, I don't dismiss them as exaggerations. I know that the danger is real and that the consequences can be devastating. Be safe online. Never trust someone you meet online immediately. Okay, so picture this. Me, freshly 28, newly single after a spectacularly fizzled-out situationship, and utterly convinced that this was the year I'd finally find my person. Armed with a curated profile featuring my best angles, witty prompts, and a carefully selected array of deal breakers. No fish pics, please and thank you. I dove headfirst into the Hinge dating pool. I was determined, optimistic, and, let's be honest, a little bit naive. Hinge, at first, felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the chaotic wasteland that was Tinder. The prompts encouraged actual conversation. The suggested matches seemed more aligned with my preferences, and the overall vibe was slightly less hookup-centric. I swiped, I matched, I chatted, and I even went on a few promising-ish dates. But then came Liam. Liam was different. His profile was intriguing, featuring photos of him hiking in obscure locations, reading classic literature, and volunteering at an animal shelter. He seemed intelligent, adventurous, and genuinely kind. His prompts were thoughtful and well-written, and his opening message was surprisingly engaging. We connected over our mutual love of obscure films, craft beer, and rescuing animals. He seemed perfect, almost too perfect. We chatted for a week or so before he suggested meeting up. He suggested a small, independent coffee shop in a neighborhood I wasn't super familiar with, but it sounded cute, so I agreed. Looking back, the first red flag was probably that he didn't offer to pick me up or meet me closer to my place. But I brushed it off. Maybe he just lived closer to the coffee shop, I reasoned. The coffee shop was, indeed, cute, but it was also surprisingly empty for a Saturday afternoon. I arrived a few minutes early and grabbed a table near the window, nervously scrolling through Instagram to kill time. Liam arrived right on schedule, and my initial impression was, well, he looked a little different than his pictures. He was shorter than I expected, and his hair was a bit messier. But hey, angles can be deceiving, right? We ordered our coffees and settled into conversation. At first, things were going well. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, and our favorite travel destinations. He was engaging, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. But then, things started to get a little off. He started asking me incredibly personal questions, like about my family dynamics, my past relationships, and my deepest insecurities. It felt like he was trying to dissect me, to understand me on a level that was far too intimate for a first date. I tried to deflect, to steer the conversation towards lighter topics, but he kept circling back, probing deeper and deeper. Then there was the way he looked at me. It wasn't a creepy, leering stare, but more of an intense, unwavering gaze. It felt like he was trying to see through me, to unearth something hidden beneath the surface. It made me incredibly uncomfortable. Despite these growing red flags, I found myself trying to rationalize his behavior. Maybe he was just a naturally intense person. Maybe he was just trying to get to know me on a deeper level. Maybe I was just being too sensitive. I really wanted to like him. After about an hour, he suggested we take a walk in a nearby park. I hesitated. The park was a bit secluded, and the sun was starting to set. My gut was screaming at me to say no, to end the date right then and there, but I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my anxieties get the best of me. Plus, I didn't want to seem rude. So I agreed. The park was beautiful, but the atmosphere was unsettling. The trees were tall and imposing, casting long, eerie shadows. The only other people around were a few elderly couples walking their dogs. As we walked, Liam's behavior became even more strange. He started talking about conspiracy theories, about secret societies, and about the government controlling our minds. He spoke in hushed tones, glancing around nervously as if he thought someone was listening. I was starting to get genuinely scared. I knew I had to get out of there. I faked a phone call, pretending my friend was having an emergency and needed me to come over immediately. Liam seemed disappointed, but he didn't argue. He walked me back to the coffee shop, where I called an Uber. The Uber ride home was the longest ride of my life. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that Liam was following me. I didn't relax until I was safely inside my apartment, with the doors locked and the windows closed. I spent the rest of the night replaying the date in my head, trying to make sense of what had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had dodged a bullet, Liam was clearly not the person he had portrayed himself to be online. He was off. Something was seriously wrong with him. The next morning, I woke up to a text message from Liam. It was a long, rambling message about how much he enjoyed our date, how he felt a deep connection with me, and how he couldn't wait to see me again. He ended the message with, "I know we're meant to be together." That was the final straw. I blocked his number, deleted him from Hinge, and reported his profile. I needed to erase him from my life completely, but the experience shook me to my core. It made me realize how easily we can be deceived by online profiles, how important it is to trust our instincts, and how crucial it is to prioritize our safety, especially when meeting strangers. But it didn't end there. It was far from over. About a week later, I started noticing things. Little things, at first. A car that seemed to be following me on my way to work. A figure lurking in the shadows outside my apartment building. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Then, one evening, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart leaped into my throat. I cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was a mess. Drawers were pulled open, clothes were strewn across the floor, and furniture was overturned. It was clear that someone had been searching for something. I called the police, who came and took a report. They said it looked like a burglary, but nothing seemed to be missing. They dusted for fingerprints, but they didn't find anything conclusive. I was terrified. I knew, deep down, that Liam was behind it. He was trying to scare me, to intimidate me, to control me. I spent the next few weeks living in a state of constant fear. I installed security cameras in my apartment, changed my locks, and started carrying pepper spray. I avoided going out alone, and I always made sure to tell someone where I was going and when I expected to be back. I eventually decided to move. I couldn't live with the constant fear of Liam finding me again. I packed my belongings, said goodbye to my friends, and moved to a different city, hoping to start fresh, hoping to leave Liam and the nightmare behind. It's been 2 years since that fateful Hinge date, and I still think about Liam sometimes. I wonder what he's doing, if he's still out there, preying on unsuspecting women. I've learned a valuable lesson about trusting my gut, about listening to my instincts, and about prioritizing my safety above all else. I'm still on Hinge, but I'm much more cautious now. I do more research, ask more questions, and trust my gut at the first sign of a red flag. Dating apps can be a great way to meet people, but they can also be dangerous. You never really know who's on the other side of that screen, so it's always better to be safe than sorry. Trust your gut, and you will be all right. Staring at the rain lashing against my window, the same rain that seems to be perpetually falling in my memories of that whole Hinge debacle. I'd be living a life of comfortable, predictable routine, blissfully unaware of the darkness that sometimes lurks behind a curated profile and a witty bio. But I did trust my instincts, or rather, I ignored them, and now the whole experience is etched into my brain like a particularly gruesome tattoo. It started, like most modern horrors, with an app. Hinge, specifically. I was newly single, freshly wounded from a relationship that had imploded with the force of a dying star. My friends, bless their well-meaning hearts, insisted I get back out there. You need to put yourself out there, they chirp, as if dating were some kind of performative art piece. I resisted for a while, clinging to the comfort of solitude and Netflix binges. But eventually, the loneliness crept in, and I caved. Hinge seemed less aggressive than Tinder, more geared towards genuine connections, or so the marketing promised. I crafted a profile, choosing photos that made me look simultaneously approachable and intriguing. A tricky balance, I assure you, and filled out the prompts with what I thought was a winning combination of humor and vulnerability. That's when I saw him. Liam. His profile was compelling, not conventionally attractive, but with a kind of raw charisma that emanated even through the phone screen. His photos were mostly candid shots, him hiking in the mountains, playing guitar by a campfire, reading in a dimly lit bookstore. He seemed adventurous, intellectual, and just a little bit mysterious. His prompts were even more intriguing. One asked, "What's the most unconventional thing you've ever done?" His answer, "Lived off-grid for a year, learning to survive in the wilderness." Another asked, "What's your biggest irrational fear?" His answer, "That I'll never truly connect with another human being." My heart did a little flutter kick. Melodramatic? Maybe. But I was a sucker for a tortured soul. We matched, naturally, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was witty, intelligent, and surprisingly self-aware. He asked thoughtful questions, listened intently to my answers, and shared his own experiences with an honesty that felt both refreshing and disarming. We talked about everything: our hopes, our dreams, our fears, our favorite books, our most embarrassing childhood moments. It felt like we had known each other for years, even though we had only been chatting for a few days. The red flags were there, of course, subtle little whispers in the back of my mind. He was evasive about his current job, claiming he was between projects. He always seemed to message late at night, saying he was a night owl. And there was something about his intensity that felt a little overwhelming. But I ignored them. I told myself I was being cynical, that I was projecting my past relationship baggage onto him. I wanted to believe in this connection, this spark, this possibility of something real. So, when he suggested we meet up, I said yes. We agreed to meet at a small, independent coffee shop on the outskirts of town. I arrived early, feeling a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I scanned the room, trying to spot him, my palms starting to sweat. And then I saw him. He was sitting in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on the window. He looked even more compelling in person. His hair was a little messy, his clothes a little worn, but his eyes were mesmerizing. Deep, dark, and intense. They seemed to hold a universe of secrets. He smiled when he saw me, and the smile transformed his entire face. It was warm, genuine, and utterly captivating. The first hour of the date was perfect. We talked, we laughed, we shared stories. He asked me about my work, my passions, my family. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, his eyes never leaving mine. He made me feel seen, heard, and understood in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. But then things started to shift. The conversation took a darker turn. He started talking about his past, about the struggles he had faced, the pain he had endured. He spoke of betrayals, of losses, of moments of profound despair. His voice was low and gravelly, his words heavy with emotion. I listened, offering words of comfort and support, but I started to feel a sense of unease creeping into my heart. There was something about his intensity that felt unsettling. He started asking me questions about my past, probing questions about my vulnerabilities, my fears, my insecurities. He seemed to want to know everything about me, to delve into the deepest, darkest corners of my soul. I answered, hesitantly, trying to keep my tone light and casual, but I could feel myself growing increasingly uncomfortable. Then he started talking about control. He spoke of the need to control one's own life, to take charge of one's own destiny. He spoke of the dangers of being controlled by others, of the importance of breaking free from societal norms and expectations. His eyes burned with a strange, almost manic energy. I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, but he was relentless. He kept circling back to the theme of control, his voice growing louder, his tone more insistent. I started to feel trapped, like I was being interrogated, like I was being manipulated. And then he reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong, almost painful. He looked me directly in the eyes, his gaze intense and unwavering. "I can see that you're special," he said, his voice low and husky. "I can see that you have the potential to be so much more than you are. But you need guidance. You need someone to show you the way." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get away from him as fast as I could. But I hesitated. Part of me, the naive, vulnerable part of me, still wanted to believe in the connection, the spark, the possibility of something real. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid, that I was letting my past experiences cloud my judgment. So I stayed. I stayed for another hour, listening to him talk about his beliefs, his philosophies, his plans for the future. He painted a picture of a life of freedom, of adventure, of profound spiritual awakening. He promised me that if I followed him, I could achieve enlightenment, that I could transcend the limitations of my ordinary existence. He made it sound so appealing, so seductive, so dangerous. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up abruptly, pulling my hand away from his. "I have to go," I said, my voice trembling. He looked surprised, then disappointed, then something else. Something darker, something colder, something that made my blood run cold. "Are you sure?" he said, his voice soft but menacing. "You're making a mistake." You're turning your back on something truly special." I didn't answer. I turned and walked away, as fast as I could, without looking back. I didn't stop running until I was safely inside my car, the doors locked, the engine running. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible, something truly evil. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened anxiety, constantly checking my locks, peering out the windows, jumping at every unexpected sound. I deleted Hinge, blocked his number, and scrubbed him from every corner of my digital life. I told my friends about what had happened, and they were horrified. They reassured me that I had done the right thing, that I had dodged a bullet. But the fear lingered. The memory of his eyes, his voice, his words haunted my dreams. I started seeing him everywhere, in the street, in the grocery store, in the shadows of my own apartment. I knew it was just my imagination, but the fear was real. It's been years since that fateful date, and I've mostly moved on. I've learned to trust my instincts, to listen to the warning bells that go off in my head. I've learned that not everyone is who they seem to be online, that sometimes the most charming profiles hide the darkest secrets. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply walking away. But still, on rainy nights like this, when the wind howls and the shadows dance, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts that day. If I had stayed. If I had let him show me the way. The thought sends a shiver down my spine, a reminder of the darkness that I narrowly escaped, a darkness that still lurks, somewhere out there, waiting for its next victim. And all it takes is a swipe right. Looking back, all the red flags were practically waving at me, doing that frantic inflatable tube man dance outside a used car dealership. But I was so blinded by the carefully curated profile, the witty banter, and the sheer novelty of someone actually seeming interested in me that I ignored every single one. It all started, as these things often do, on Hinge. I was relatively new to the app, having sworn off online dating after a string of truly disastrous Tinder encounters. Hinge, with its emphasis on personality-driven prompts and most compatible algorithms, felt different. More sophisticated, maybe. Or maybe I was just delusional. Anyway, I stumbled across Liam's profile, and I was immediately intrigued. His photos were a mix of travel shots, hiking in Yosemite, exploring a bustling market in Marrakesh, candid snaps with friends, laughing over beers, playing board games, and one particularly fetching picture of him reading a book in a sun-drenched cafe. He looked adventurous, intelligent, and genuinely kind. His prompts were equally engaging. He listed solving a Rubik's Cube as one of his skills, claimed his greatest strength was making the perfect cup of coffee, and admitted his biggest fear was running out of books to read. It was all so charming, so effortlessly cool. I sent him a like with a comment about the Rubik's Cube, admitting I'd never managed to solve one myself. He responded almost immediately, and we were off to the races. The initial conversations were fantastic. He was funny, articulate, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. We bonded over our shared love of indie films, obscure music, and quirky bookstores. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, my hobbies, and my dreams. It was a refreshing change from the usual superficial exchanges I'd experienced on other dating apps. Looking back, red flag number 1, the intensity. Liam was always available. He responded to my messages within minutes, no matter the time of day. He showered me with compliments, praising my intelligence, my humor, and my unique perspective on the world. It felt amazing at first, like finally being seen and appreciated for who I truly was. But it quickly became overwhelming. I started to feel like I was constantly performing, trying to live up to his idealized image of me. Red flag number 2, the vague job. When I asked Liam about his work, he was always evasive. He described himself as a freelance consultant, but never elaborated on what that actually entailed. He claimed his work was highly confidential, and that he couldn't discuss the details. I initially chalked it up to professional discretion, but the lack of specifics started to feel suspicious. What kind of consultant couldn't even mention the industry they worked in? Red flag number 3, the disappearing acts. Despite his constant availability online, Liam would occasionally vanish for hours, sometimes even days, without explanation. He'd resurface with vague apologies, claiming he'd been dealing with a family emergency or traveling for work. The explanations never quite added up, and the lack of communication left me feeling anxious and insecure. We eventually decided to meet in person. He suggested a small, independent coffee shop near my apartment. I was nervous, but also excited. I wanted to see if the online connection would translate into real-life chemistry. The date started off well. Liam was just as charming and engaging in person as he was online. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. But as the evening progressed, I started to notice some unsettling details. He kept glancing around the coffee shop, as if he was expecting someone to appear. He avoided making direct eye contact with me, instead focusing on a point just over my shoulder. And he kept asking me probing questions about my personal life, my address, my daily routine, my relationships with my family and friends. Red flag number 4, the controlling behavior. After the first date, Liam became increasingly possessive and controlling. He wanted to know where I was at all times, who I was with, and what I was doing. He'd text me constantly, demanding updates and expressing jealousy if I didn't respond immediately. He started criticizing my friends, claiming they were a bad influence on me. He even tried to dictate what I should wear, suggesting I dress more modestly. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just insecure and overly attached. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong. Red flag number 5, the gaslighting. Whenever I tried to express my concerns about his behavior, Liam would dismiss my feelings as irrational and unfounded. He'd accuse me of being too sensitive or overreacting. He'd twist my words around, making me feel like I was the one who was being unreasonable. He made me doubt my own sanity. I started to isolate myself from my friends and family, afraid of their judgment and desperate to avoid conflict with Liam. I was trapped in a cycle of manipulation and control. The breaking point came one evening when I discovered a hidden compartment in his apartment. I'd gone over to his place to watch a movie, and while he was in the kitchen making popcorn, I decided to snoop around. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. I found the compartment behind a loose panel in his bedroom closet. Inside, there was a collection of photos and documents, all related to me. There were photos of my apartment building, my car, my workplace. There were printouts of my social media profiles, my online banking statements, my medical records. There was even a detailed map of my neighborhood, with my house marked in red. He was stalking me. I didn't confront him. I didn't say a word. I simply grabbed my purse and ran out of the apartment, tears streaming down my face. I blocked his number, deleted him from all my social media accounts, and filed a police report. I was terrified. The police took my report seriously and launched an investigation. They discovered that Liam wasn't who he claimed to be. His real name was redacted, and he had a long history of stalking and harassing women. He'd been using Hinge to find victims, carefully crafting a profile that would appeal to their vulnerabilities and insecurities. He was eventually arrested and charged with multiple counts of stalking and harassment. I testified against him in court. It was a traumatic experience, but I knew I had to do it, not just for myself, but for other women who might be targeted by him in the future. It's been several years since that ordeal, and I'm still dealing with the emotional fallout. I have trust issues. I'm afraid to go out alone at night, and I'm terrified of online dating. But I'm also stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. I learned a valuable lesson about the importance of trusting my instincts and recognizing red flags early on, and I'm determined not to let this experience define me. Looking back, I realized that the red flags were there from the beginning. I just chose to ignore them because I was so desperate for connection and validation. I wanted to believe in the idealized version of Liam that I created in my head, even when the reality was screaming at me to run. I'll never make that mistake again. Now, I am much more careful and aware of my surroundings when using apps. Okay, so, I need to tell someone about this. I haven't really talked about it to anyone except my therapist, and even then, it feels like I'm holding back. It's not that I'm ashamed, exactly, but more like embarrassed, like I should have seen the red flag sooner, or that I'm somehow responsible for what happened. It started, like so many things do these days, on Hinge. I was fresh out of a really bad breakup, the kind where you question everything you thought you knew about a person. I wasn't looking for love or anything serious, honestly. I was just trying to feel like a normal human being again. Hinge felt safer than Tinder somehow. More curated, less overtly hookup-oriented. So, I made a profile, put up some decent pictures, mostly hiking shots and one of me awkwardly holding a cat, and started swiping. I matched with a few guys, had some boring conversations, and went on a couple of equally boring dates. And then I matched with Liam. Liam was different. His profile was thoughtful, with funny and self-deprecating answers to the prompts. He had a good job. He seemed to enjoy the same books and movies I did, and he was genuinely attractive, in that slightly nerdy, intellectual kind of way that I'm always drawn to. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He wasn't pushy or overly complimentary, but he was attentive and engaging. It felt like we actually had things in common, which was a refreshing change from the usual dating app experience. After a few days of messaging, he asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee. I hesitated. I was still a little emotionally raw from the breakup, and the idea of putting myself out there again was daunting. But Liam seemed genuinely nice, and I figured, what the hell? It's just coffee. We met at a small, independent coffee shop near my apartment. He was even more attractive in person, and the conversation was even better than it had been online. We talked for hours about everything and nothing: books, movies, our families, our dreams. He was a good listener. He was funny, and he made me feel comfortable and at ease. By the end of the date, I was actually excited. It felt like maybe, just maybe, I had met someone special. We went out again a few days later, this time for dinner. The date was just as good as the first. We laughed, we shared stories, and at the end of the night, he walked me back to my apartment and kissed me goodnight. It was a perfect kiss, the kind that makes your knees weak and your heart race. Things progressed quickly after that. We started spending most of our free time together. We went on hikes. We cooked dinner at my place. We watched movies. We went to museums. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Intelligent, kind, funny, and attractive. He was also incredibly attentive and caring. He always remembered the little things, like my favorite coffee order or the name of my childhood pet. He made me feel seen and appreciated in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. About a month into dating, he started talking about the future. He talked about traveling together, about moving in together, even about getting married someday. It was a little intense, maybe, but I was so caught up in the whirlwind of the relationship that I didn't really think about it. I just went along with it, enjoying the feeling of being loved and cherished. That's when things started to get weird. He started becoming possessive. He would get jealous if I talked to other guys, even my male friends. He would constantly check in with me, wanting to know where I was and who I was with. At first, I brushed it off as him just being affectionate, but it quickly became suffocating. He also started isolating me from my friends and family. He would make subtle comments about them, suggesting that they didn't have my best interests at heart or that they were secretly jealous of our relationship. He convinced me that they were trying to sabotage us, and slowly but surely, I started to distance myself from them. Looking back, I can see how manipulative he was being, but at the time, I was so blinded by love that I couldn't see the forest for the trees. Then there were the secrets. He started acting strangely secretive, hiding his phone from me, changing his passwords, and refusing to talk about certain parts of his life. When I asked him about it, he would get defensive and accuse me of being insecure and distrustful. He would say that he needed his privacy and that I was being unreasonable. I wanted to trust him, but his behavior was making it impossible. One night, I couldn't sleep. Liam was sound asleep next to me, but I was wide awake, my mind racing with anxiety and doubt. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that he was hiding something from me. Against my better judgment, I decided to look through his phone. I know. It was a huge invasion of privacy, but I felt like I had no other choice. I waited until he was deeply asleep, then carefully took his phone from the nightstand and unlocked it using his fingerprint. I know, I'm terrible. I started scrolling through his messages, hoping to find some answers. At first, there was nothing suspicious, just routine texts from friends and family. But then I found a folder labeled Private, hidden deep within his photo album. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The folder was filled with pictures of me. Pictures taken without my knowledge. Pictures of me sleeping, showering, changing. Pictures of me in my apartment, taken from outside my window. I was horrified. He had been stalking me. He had been invading my privacy in the most disturbing way imaginable. I felt sick to my stomach. I woke him up immediately. I confronted him with the pictures, and he didn't deny it. He tried to justify it, saying that he was just protecting me and that he loved me so much he couldn't help himself. He said that he needed to know I was safe and that he couldn't trust anyone else to do it. I didn't believe a word of it. I told him to get out of my apartment and out of my life. He begged me to forgive him, but I was done. I called the police, and they arrested him. It turned out that he had a history of stalking and harassment. He had done similar things to other women in the past. I was lucky to have gotten out when I did. The aftermath was messy. I had to deal with the police investigation, the restraining order, and the emotional fallout from the experience. I had to rebuild my relationships with my friends and family, who were understandably angry that I had isolated myself from them. I spent months in therapy, trying to process what had happened and to learn how to trust again. It's been a few years since then, and I'm doing better. I'm still single, and I'm still wary of dating apps, but I'm learning to trust my instincts and to recognize the red flags early on. I'm sharing this because I never thought I'd be that person, the one who fell for the charming, manipulative stalker they met on Hinge. But it happened, and it could happen to anyone. It's important to be aware of the signs of abuse and to trust your gut, even when it's telling you something you don't want to hear. And it's important to remember that you're not alone. So yeah, that's my Hinge horror story. Still freaks me out to think about it. It started innocently enough, as most things do these days. I was bored, freshly single after a fairly amicable but ultimately passionless relationship, and everyone kept telling me to get back out there. So I downloaded Hinge. I liked the whole designed to be deleted tagline. Seemed less desperate than swiping endlessly on Tinder. Plus, the prompts felt like they could actually reveal something about a person beyond their curated photos. I spent a few days setting up my profile, agonizing over which pictures to use and what woody but not too try-hard answers to give to the prompts. Finally, I took a deep breath and started sending out likes. Most of them went unanswered, which I expected. Online dating is a numbers game, right? But then I matched with him. His name was Ethan. His profile was intriguing. His pictures weren't your typical posed selfies. They were candid, almost blurry, like snapshots taken by a friend who wasn't paying attention. One was of him hiking, another of him reading in a coffee shop, and another of him playing guitar at what looked like an open mic night. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had kind eyes and a genuine smile. His prompts were thoughtful and a little quirky. One said, "I'm overly competitive about trivia night." Another said, "My simple pleasures, rainy days and old books." And the third, "I'm looking for someone who can make me laugh until my stomach hurts." I liked his profile instantly. He seemed like the kind of person I could actually connect with on a deeper level. So, I sent him a like with a comment about his trivia night answer. And to my surprise, he responded almost immediately. Our conversation flowed easily. We talked about our favorite books, our travel aspirations, and our shared love of obscure indie bands. He was intelligent, funny, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. It felt different than any other online dating experience I'd had. It felt real. After a few days of nonstop texting, he asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me was still wary of meeting strangers from the internet, but the other part of me was excited. I'd built up this image of him in my head, and I desperately wanted to see if he lived up to it. So I said yes. We met at a small cafe near my apartment. He was even more attractive in person than in his pictures. He had a warm, easy smile and a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. I felt like I'd known him my whole life. The date went so well that we made plans to see each other again the following week. We went to a concert and then out for dinner afterward. Each date felt better than the last. I was falling hard and fast. But then, things started to get weird. It started subtly. He began asking me strange questions. Questions that felt intrusive and personal. He wanted to know about my past relationships, about my family history, about my deepest fears and insecurities. At first, I chalked it up to him being genuinely interested in getting to know me. But the questions kept getting more and more intense. He also started exhibiting some controlling behavior. He wanted to know where I was at all times, who I was with, and what I was doing. He'd get jealous if I spent time with my friends without him. He'd accuse me of lying if I didn't answer his texts immediately. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself that he was just insecure and that I was overreacting. But the feeling of unease kept growing stronger. One night, we were at his apartment watching a movie. He got up to get a drink, and I decided to use the bathroom. While I was in there, I noticed a small, locked box on the top shelf of his closet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I reached up to take a look. The box was heavy and made of metal. I tried to open it, but it was securely locked. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I knew I shouldn't be snooping through his things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I put the box back on the shelf and went back to the living room. When Ethan came back, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the image of that locked box from my mind. Later that night, after I'd gone home, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the box, about the strange questions he'd been asking, about the controlling behavior. Something just didn't add up. I decided to do some research. I started by searching his name online. I found a few social media profiles, but nothing too revealing. Then, I stumbled upon a news article about a missing woman from a neighboring town. The woman had disappeared a year earlier, and the case was still unsolved. As I read the article, a chill ran down my spine. The woman's description sounded eerily similar to me. She had the same hair color, the same eye color, the same general build. I scrolled further down the page and saw a picture of the woman. My heart skipped a beat. She looked almost exactly like me. I spent the rest of the night digging through old news articles, searching for any connection between Ethan and the missing woman. I found nothing concrete, but the more I searched, the more convinced I became that he was involved. The next morning, I confronted him. I told him about the news article, about the locked box, about my suspicions. He denied everything. He said I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But I could see the fear in his eyes. I told him I was done. I couldn't be with someone I didn't trust, someone who made me feel unsafe. I packed my things and left his apartment, never looking back. I went to the police and told them everything. They took my statement and said they would look into it, but they warned me that they didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. I haven't heard from Ethan since. The police are still investigating the case, but the missing woman is still missing. I try not to think about it too much, but it's hard not to wonder what happened to her and what could have happened to me. I still use Hinge, occasionally. I swipe and message, but there is still a part of me that remains broken and scared. I am constantly scanning, searching for a familiar face. It made me aware of how much can be hidden behind a curated online persona. It made me realize that you can never truly know someone, no matter how well you think you do. I'm not sure that I will ever fall in love, or even go on another date. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. Was I just being paranoid? Was Ethan really involved in the woman's disappearance? Or was it all just a series of coincidences that I misinterpreted? I may never know the answer. I just hope that one day, the missing woman's family will get the closure they deserve, and I hope that I can eventually put this whole experience behind me and move on with my life. But a small part of me is scared that history will repeat itself. It started with a Hinge notification, a simple, unassuming red dot on my phone screen that would ultimately unravel into something I still can't fully comprehend. I was fresh out of a bad breakup. You know the type. The kind where you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. My friends convinced me to get back on the apps, said it would be a good distraction, a way to dip my toes back into the dating pool without any real commitment. Hinge felt safer than Tinder, more curated, less about mindless swiping. That's what I told myself anyway. His profile was intriguing. His name was Liam, and his pictures were a mix of hiking shots in the mountains, artsy black and white photos, and one slightly blurry picture of him playing a guitar. His prompts were thoughtful, bordering on brooding. He wrote about his love for classic literature, his passion for environmental conservation, and his disdain for small talk. I remember thinking, okay, this guy actually seems interesting. And maybe, after the dumpster fire that was my last relationship, interesting was exactly what I needed. We matched, and the conversation flowed easily. He was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my hobbies, my aspirations, my fears. He listened intently, responding with thoughtful questions and insightful observations. I found myself looking forward to his messages, eager to delve deeper into his world. It felt different from the superficial interactions I'd had on other dating apps. This felt real. After a week of nonstop texting, he suggested we meet up. He proposed a picnic in a secluded park on the outskirts of the city. It sounded idyllic, romantic even. I hesitated for a moment, a flicker of apprehension creeping in, but I brushed it aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. This was just a date, after all. The day of the picnic arrived, and I found myself surprisingly nervous. I spent hours agonizing over what to wear, what to say, how to act. I wanted to make a good impression, to show him the best version of myself. I packed a basket with sandwiches, fruit, and a bottle of wine, and headed to the park. When I arrived, Liam was already there, waiting for me by a sprawling oak tree. He looked even more handsome in person than he did in his photos. He had kind eyes, a warm smile, and an aura of quiet confidence that drew me in. We exchanged greetings, and he helped me spread out the blanket. The picnic started off perfectly. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He was charming, engaging, and genuinely interested in everything I had to say. I felt a connection forming between us, a spark of something special. As the sun began to set, the atmosphere shifted. The park grew quieter, the air cooler. Liam's demeanor changed subtly. He became more intense, his gaze more penetrating. He started asking me personal questions, probing into my past, my insecurities, my deepest fears. I found myself growing uncomfortable, but I tried to brush it off, attributing it to nerves. Then, he started talking about his own past. He spoke of a troubled childhood, of a deep sense of isolation and alienation. He described his struggles with depression and anxiety, his feelings of being misunderstood and alone. I listened intently, feeling a wave of empathy wash over me. I wanted to help him, to ease his pain. As he spoke, his voice grew softer, his eyes more intense. He leaned closer to me, his hand brushing against mine. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something felt wrong off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but a sense of unease began to creep into my mind. He started telling me about his philosophy of life, his belief that true connection could only be achieved through complete and utter honesty. He said that he wanted to share his deepest, darkest secrets with me, to reveal the true essence of his being. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to hear what he had to say. He took my hand in his grip surprisingly strong. His eyes locked onto mine, his gaze unwavering. "I have to tell you something," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Something that I've never told anyone before. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew deep down that whatever he was about to say would change everything. I braced myself, preparing for the worst. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my ear. "I'm not who you think I am," he whispered. "I'm not the person you met on Hinge." My mind raced. What did he mean? Was he married? Was he lying about his job? Was he some kind of criminal? He pulled away slightly, his eyes searching mine. "I'm not human," he said, his voice trembling. I stared at him in disbelief. Was this some kind of joke? Was he trying to scare me? He shook his head, his expression earnest. "I know it sounds crazy," he said, "but it's the truth. I'm something else." He started to explain. He spoke of ancient beings, of hidden realms, of a reality far beyond human comprehension. He claimed that he was one of these beings, that he had been living among humans for centuries, observing, learning, waiting. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as a ridiculous fantasy, but something in his eyes, something in his voice, convinced me that he was telling the truth, or at least, that he believed what he was saying. He told me that he had been drawn to me, that he had sensed something special within me, something that resonated with his own being. He said that he believed we were meant to be together, that we were destined to embark on a journey beyond the confines of this world. I was terrified. I wanted to run, to scream, to escape, but I was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. He reached out and gently stroked my cheek. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "I would never hurt you. I only want to show you the truth." He stood up and extended his hand to me. "Come with me," he said. "Let me show you the world beyond the veil. Let me show you who you truly are." I hesitated for a moment, torn between fear and fascination. What if he was telling the truth? What if there was something more to reality than I had ever imagined? I took his hand. What followed was a blur of sensations, a kaleidoscope of images and sounds that defied description. He led me through a hidden portal, a shimmering gateway that transported us to another realm. The world I entered was unlike anything I had ever seen. The sky was a swirling vortex of colors, the ground pulsed with energy, and strange, ethereal beings floated through the air. Liam showed me wonders beyond my wildest dreams, realities that challenged my very understanding of existence. But as I explored this new world, a sense of unease began to grow within me. I realized that Liam's intentions were not as pure as he had claimed. He wanted to control me, to mold me into his vision of what I should be. He wanted to sever my ties to my old life, to erase my memories, to transform me into something other. I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. I had trusted the wrong person. I had ventured too far into the unknown, and now I was trapped. I knew that I had to escape, that I had to find a way back to my old life. But Liam was always watching me, always anticipating my every move. He had become my captor, my jailer, my tormentor. I spent weeks, maybe months, trapped in this alien world, searching for a way out. I tried to reason with Liam, to plead with him to let me go. But he was unmoved, his eyes filled with a cold, unyielding determination. Finally, I saw an opportunity. One day, while Liam was distracted, I managed to slip away. I ran as fast as I could, navigating the treacherous landscape, desperate to find the portal that would lead me back home. Liam pursued me relentlessly, his voice echoing through the alien landscape. But I refused to give up. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I could run no more. Finally, I reached the portal. I hesitated for a moment, looking back at the world I was leaving behind. Then I stepped through. I found myself back in the park, standing by the oak tree where I had first met Liam. The sun was setting, the air was cool, and the world seemed strangely normal. I looked around, disoriented and confused. Was it all a dream? Had I imagined everything? But then I saw it. A small, shimmering object lying on the ground near my feet. It was a stone, a strange, otherworldly stone that pulsed with a faint, inner light. I picked it up and held it in my hand. As I did, a flood of memories washed over me. I remembered the alien world, the ethereal beings, the fear, the desperation. It was all real. I dropped the stone as if it were burning my hand. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached my car. I drove home, my mind racing, my body trembling. I locked myself in my apartment, pulling the curtains shut, shutting out the world. I spent days in a state of terrified paranoia, convinced that Liam would find me, that he would drag me back to his world. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. Eventually, the fear subsided, replaced by a deep sense of sadness and loss. I knew that my life would never be the same. I had seen too much. I had experienced too much, and I could never go back to being the person I once was. I deleted my Hinge account. I avoided dating apps altogether. I retreated from the world, seeking solace in solitude. But even now, years later, I still think about Liam. I still wonder about the world he showed me, the secrets he revealed, and I still feel a lingering sense of fear, a nagging feeling that he's still out there, watching me, waiting for me to return. I keep replaying that nightmare in my head, wondering how I could have been so naive, so foolish.